a wide range of spiritual topics right here on Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to an emerging forest, a safe place where we have the freedom to think about life without judgment. We take a look at society, we examine it, and we allow for the possibility of something new, something different. And now, here's your host, Alan Ritter.
Welcome, everyone, to this January 21st show, 2018, of An Emerging Forest. And it's my great pleasure to welcome to the show my co-host, David Whitman, and our very special guest, Gina Renzi. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Alan.
We're on.
Hello, Alan.
So, Gina, I'm not going to introduce Gina. Gina's supposed, going to tell her story. So why don't we start with a sort of a ground up, or sort of, where did you grow up, Gina, and where do you live now?
I grew up in South Philadelphia, South Philly, and I live in West Philly. And as we were discussing before we got on the air, West Philly is kind of a state of mind, which I think I'm going to make a T-shirt that says that. It kind of came to me. But yeah, I live in a really incredible neighborhood with artists, activists, people from all different countries, people from all different educational backgrounds, all different colors, creeds. It's just a really awesome place to be. And, a lot of people doing community organizing and independent community arts and things like that. So it's, I think it's a really special place to live.
And
I would agree in my short time here.
And what's your educational background, your upbringing, sort of, maybe to give the listeners a feel for where you came from in your quote-unquote pre-what we're going to talk about years.
Right. So I grew up in a very sort of, I guess, blue-collar family, you would call it, in South Philly. My dad worked in a tailor shop in North Philly, which, at one point Philly was known as the workshop of the world, and we had people producing all sorts of things, and especially garments. So he worked in a place where they produced uniforms for the military and suits and all sorts of things, and he did that for 20-some years. My mom had a variety of jobs managing offices and apartments, and so I got a really strong work ethic from both of them. They'd get up early, and take us to school and just work really hard. I have one brother who is only 14 months younger than I am, so we had a lot of the same experiences growing up because we were close in age and we were together a lot. And I went to 12 years of Catholic school, so that was pretty interesting, and I think that also gave me a really strong work ethic and also a really deep sense of compassion and obligation and responsibility and things like that. So, but I was always sort of a behind the scenes kind of artsy person. I was kind of the kid in school that they would ask to make posters for an event coming up, or, to design a set for something. I wasn't really the person on the stage. And it's just funny that I found myself in the job that I'm in now, where I'm essentially an arts advocate, and a supporter and kind of the cheerleader, as opposed to the artist, herself. So yeah, I mean, I that's kind of where I started from. And as far as my education, everything that I do now, I don't really think I studied in college. So I started at Drexel. And I thought I wanted to be an architect, and I was totally set. I don't know why I thought that. It was just I had always been interested in architectural history and just sort of just kind of the more like the romance of architecture. And I guess it was maybe a year and a half in, and I thought, well, I do not want to be an architect. This is not at all what I want to do. And I think what was cool, though, was that I learned how to pull a lot of all-nighters, being an architecture student and just working long hours. And that actually really helped me a lot later on, because I work really crazy long days now. So I realized that I wanted to actually just study art history. And at the time, Drexel didn't have a major in that. So I transferred to Temple. So these are all universities in Philadelphia, of course. So I transferred to Temple, studied art history, and then eventually just sort of found myself in a group of artists, musicians, DJs, just a bunch of creative people, and we started putting on events. And at the same time, I was working at commercial venues in the city. So my education really has been a lot of just hands-on experience, a lot of observing things that things that I found, situations I found myself in the venues that I was working at. I used to work at the Electric Factory and the TLA. They're both still open and flourishing in Philly. And I got those jobs between my time at Drexel and Temple, when I was sort of struggling a bit and trying to figure out what I was doing. And they really kind of gave me so many different experiences that I think I was more prepared for what I do now.
David, do you have anything to ask?
Yeah, I want to know how it was. It's interesting how you worked at a place like TLA and also the Electric Factory. And the question I had regarded how you've taken that experience into what you were doing now. If you talk more about what you do now at the Rotunda, and how that all has kind of morphed and evolved into to what you're up to these days.
So what I do now is, and what I've done since 2003, actually, which is such a long time ago now. But what I do is I run essentially community arts and culture programs out of the University of Pennsylvania, Penn. And so I'm employed by the Department of Facilities and Real Estate there, which when I tell people that, sometimes they kind of, they're puzzled and wondering why it's not run out of theater arts or something like that. But so essentially what I do is I run these programs that are technically off campus, just on the very edge of campus, and they use buildings that the university at one point used to sort of call these buildings underperforming assets. And of course that's, it has a negative connotation, which wasn't really their intention. But the whole idea was that they're buildings that are not used for, for classrooms, dorms, retail, any sort of the main uses that a university would have for a building. And I animate them along with lots of other people with arts and culture. And, the Rotunda is sort of the main star of all of that. And it's a very, a vibrant community arts and culture venue where we have something like 250 to 300 events a year. and about 16 to 17,000 people attend events, and and I know we're going to get into the sort of the mechanics of that in a couple minutes. And then in addition to that, I run the 40th Street Artist in Residence program, which is housed in two former houses, actually, that the university owns a block away from the Rotunda, and we use the rooms there as studio spaces for visual artists who are strongly tied to West Philly and are considered emerging artists. And then they complete community outreach work in exchange for the studio spaces. They get a year of free studio space, and and they get to create and do whatever they want, really. And then they work on these outreach projects. And then I also run some other programs. One is the 48th Street Summer Series, which is an outdoor sort of expansion of what happens at the Rotunda. It's a community concert and dance festival that happens on a green space around the corner. And then at times I also work with artists to exhibit their work in vacant storefronts, because the university has a lot of buildings and sometimes they're in flux. So, a business may move out of a store and the storefront is vacant. So many, many times I've had artists bring, their art to those spaces. And, little things here and there. I've helped program other spaces on campus. I've helped sort of coordinate efforts and just different kinds of projects between groups in the community and groups on campus, and just sort of being this kind of community arts person. But the way that it all worked with the jobs that I had before, we mentioned the TLA and the Electric Factory. They're very different spaces. They're these commercial concert venues. You buy a ticket, you see a show, you leave, and that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's cool. But I was always interested, even before I knew it, I think, in ways that an audience member could be on the stage the next week, or somebody in the stage could, be an audience member, or they could meet, or people could collaborate and, dream up new things and stuff like that. But when I was working at the TLA and the Electric Factory, I did a variety of things. I worked in the box offices. I assisted the house managers at times. At one point, I was doing bar bookkeeping. I was just kind of doing whatever, and it was invaluable, actually, because I would interact with the public on a regular basis, which takes a lot of course, patience and flexibility, but also, if you're too thin-skinned, you're not going to make it. So I really sort of toughened my skin, my hide, doing that kind of stuff. And also, just kind of seeing things like behind the scenes, going backstage, meeting famous bands, remembering that they're just people like everybody else, and seeing sound checks, which is always my favorite part, and just kind of observing, just sort of seeing, well, what cable are they using for this thing, or why is this poster so attractive that the marketing department created? What's the thinking behind that? Just kind of tried to think about everything that they were doing, and and everybody who worked there, I think for the most part, worked at both places, were just excited to be around concerts. And as tough as the days would be, and as stressful as it might be, especially if you were under deadline, or things, technical problems were happening or whatever, when the concert started, it was still exciting. So, I still have that. But yeah, so I took a lot of those practical skills and just sort of the experience of sort of being diplomatic to people when they're not happy, especially when you work in a box office. You encounter people who are really excited, but then you encounter a lot of people who are very unhappy because, the show is sold out, or they thought their name was on the guest list and it's not, or, we would deal with record label, people from record labels, and people who in some cases had a very inflated sense of themselves. And so, sometimes we'd have to knock them down a couple pegs, so all of that, was it all fed in. And I'm also one of those people who just kind of believes that you can get, you can glean so much from every day of your life, and it changes you every day. And so you kind of pour all that into whatever you're doing, and it's going to be different, So I don't know how my work now would have been different had I been in other jobs, but but I think it was just exciting. And also simply the idea, and this may seem like such a simple thing, but it's true, simply the idea of working nights and weekends. A lot of people really can't get used to that. And, it kind of messes with your sleep and your meal times and things like that. So I got used to that, so it was 1997, I think, when I started at the Electric Factory. So now almost 21 years of working lots of nights and weekends. I don't know. I'm just.
You're used to that.
I'm used to it. It's who I am,
So what happens at these places that you? I'm sorry. No, I'm saying what happens at these places that you? I guess, for lack of a better term, put together these events and things. What is that process like, and what are some of the different events that you're putting on, and are they all scheduled, or do people come up to you with ideas, or how's that work?
So with the Rotunda, so that that, like I said, is the most active, kind of the main star of my programming. And the way that it works is sometimes I joke and I tell people, it's not the Gina show. So it's not. What I want to see on stage, or behind the stage or whatever, is kind of irrelevant. It's about what other people want to see. So there are very few events that I plan from A to Z. I'll help people, but mostly what I do is I facilitate. So people come up to me, they have an idea. It could be anybody. It could be a student, an activist, an artist, whatever. And, maybe they've never put on an event before. And so that requires a different kind of skill set. I'll have to sit down with them and we'll talk about what they want to accomplish and how to make sure that their event is inclusive and how to, think about their marketing, how they're going to get audiences and not just their friends, just all sorts of things. Some people are very seasoned. They've put on lots of events and they just need a space that is going to be welcoming to them. Sometimes lots of times actually, I have self-producing, performing artists come up to me, and they're juggling so much. They're not only creating work, but they have to book themselves and promote themselves and figure out their technical stuff. And, so I try to kind of work all of that out, and I'll put them in touch with, our sound techs, for example, or, whoever's going to be working their event. I'll walk them through the process. Especially if I'm going to be working their event. And just kind of, a lot of it is just making sure people are comfortable and that they don't have to worry about some things. Because a lot of venues, especially small community venues, don't have, I think, some of the resources that we have. Even though we have a tiny budget, and if you come to the Rotunda, you'll say, oh, wow, some of this building really needs some work. Despite all of that, we have the support of the university. We have a small programming budget. We pay event organizers and performers to do what they're doing if an event is free. So if you look at our website, for example, and you see an event says, admission is free, we're paying those people to perform. So it's very different from a lot of other spaces because we're constantly sort of throwing tools at you, and we expect people to do good work and to respect our time and things like that. And because of all of that, there are lots of people that I work with, just time again, just over and over. I have some event organizers who put on events every month, or maybe every year, but they usually try to return to us because of the way we treat them. We try to just really, if somebody's doing an event, I kind of act like that's the only event that exists on the planet, just for that short amount of time, just so they feel supported. It's not like a rental space, where you just pay something, somebody gives you a key and says, good luck. It's not how it is. But at the same time, it's not a space where we're curating everything. So it's this hybrid space, But the way that it works, I should back up a second and say that, so I didn't create this programming model, if you will. Back in 1998, there were students at Penn who were in an urban studies seminar, and they were talking about ways to bridge the gap between the university and the surrounding neighborhoods. And it's always a challenge, especially when you have a university that has a large campus that has encroached upon its neighbors, and in some cases has used eminent domain, and people have lost their homes. And there's a lot of sad history, in sort of Penn's place in West Philly. But there are a lot of people at Penn who want to make good, so to speak. And so these students were studying all of that. It was a very important time at Penn, actually, because they were studying what was called the West Philadelphia Initiatives. And it was just this whole kind of plan that Penn had to support local businesses, to open a K-8 school, to support retailers who would come into spaces that they owned, like all sorts of things to kind of invest in the neighborhood as opposed to, disinvest. And so they were looking at all that, and they thought, well, what can we do to kind of further this work and help bridge this gap? And they decided eventually that they would seek some funding from the university, very modest amount, at a small space wherever they could get it, and they would put on free events, and they would promote to everyone, and they would get performers from the surrounding neighborhoods as well as the student body, and basically just throw people in a room together and say, you guys have a lot in common. We'll all perform together, or, we'll have panel discussions and we'll talk about things or whatever. And I think this was really advanced. These were undergrad students. They really cared about this kind of thing. One of them was my friend Andrew Zitzer, who actually works at Drexel now and has created a whole discipline at Drexel that they didn't even have until he and some others created. And it's all about urban studies and urban planning, but from community angles. And his work, way back when as an undergrad, I think really informs that. So, these people really, even now, are changing the world in some ways. So I came I started volunteering in 2000, so just a couple of years after they were in this class, and they founded this program. And I was helping to put on a monthly event that showcased experimental music, which was always sort of my favorite kind of music. And eventually the space needed a full-time director. I interviewed for it. I had already been, like I said, volunteering and sort of hanging around the space and helping other people put on events. And so I got the job. So I think that answers your question.
No, it was beautiful. Thank you. That was just great to listen to and just hear your passion about it, and just also your knowledge on it. I mean, it's great. I mean, you're completely in line with a lot of my own personal passions and viewpoints as well. So it was really great. Thank you, Gina.
Thanks.
So there's an interesting political question. I can see what motivated Penn at that time to support to create this initiative, and it was sort of a moment in time. Do you think they would do the same thing today? Do you think there's that was sort of an interesting period of time where this actually happened? Of course, they were talking. Penn was talking about a lot more that, as you discussed, a lot more support for merchants, a lot more K through 8 school, as you said. They were basically talking the whole alphabet, but it wound up, to my mind, maybe you can correct me, it wound up being the program that you run. So that's like 3 or 4 questions there.
Okay. So, and one thing I should say real fast. So I mentioned the Rotunda, and with the Artist in Residence program, that sort of was assigned to me, if you will. So I talked about how I wound up at the Rotunda, but with the Artist in Residence program, that was founded by Edward Epstein, who is an artist and educator, and he saw a need for studio space in West Philly. We have artists everywhere, visual artists, and even now we don't have a lot of accessible, affordable studio spaces or studio spaces at all. And he talk about being in the right place at the right time. He was at an event that the president of the university was at, the president at the time, Judith Rodin, and he kind of pitched his idea to her and said, I know that you guys have, you're doing all these things and you're trying to, create a good face in the community and the neighborhood, and this is a whole group of people who's left out. You have just like I said, you have artists everywhere. I know you have spaces. They could do community outreach work on your behalf and blah blah blah, and she liked it. So would that kind of stuff happen now? I don't know. One thing is, the university is, for the most part, is no longer expanding westward. For the most part, they really have their sights set on eastward kind of stuff. So, they bought the postal lands, like around 30th Street. They opened Pennovation, which is at 34th and Grace Ferry. So like all these things that are around the riverbanks and everything, and that's all looking more toward Center City at this point. So, sort of community outreach in a place like Center City is very, very, very different from outreach in a place like West Philly, where you have people who have been here, their entire lives. You have people who remember in the late 50s, early and through the 60s and 70s when Penn was not such a great neighbor. So it's different. I think that the support that we have from the university for our programs has not, it's certainly not gone away. It's certainly not gone down. I'm a full-time employee at the university doing this work, so I think that the support is there. I don't know that this idea would float right now. But I will say that the president of the university now, Amy Gutman, has talked about the arts a lot. And even when she was inaugurated, she talked about the commitment to the arts. And there are some sort of initiatives on campus that are trying to get all of us kind of arts people at the university together, and collaborate more, which is always challenging. And so there are things like that. But quite frankly, there really isn't the real estate that they had back then. They're just, they have lots of buildings, but they're not necessarily, they don't necessarily have a lot of buildings that are kind of waiting to be used for something. So it's a different time, but I'm glad that it all started when it did and that it's continuing. And I think the reason that they continue it is that it's all positive. And what we do is just sort of allow kind of organic relationships and collaborations and partnerships to happen, by introducing artists to each other and community organizers and activists and students at Penn. There will be students who find the Rotunda in their freshman year and they come to events and they put on events, and then, they graduate and they come back and they visit. I spent part of MLK Day 6 days ago with a student who had interned at the Rotunda 2-3 years ago, and we're still in touch. And she's actually working in Kensington, doing community work there. And so, all of these connections are strong and they're still there. So yeah, I think that answered your question. I think you had 3 questions, but I forget what 2 of them were.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
As I'll remind the listeners coming out of the break that anyone is welcome to call, and I'll give the the number then. But right now, let's listen to Darv the Bard, Hal and Toe. And see you on the other side of the break, everyone.
Take no scorn to wear the horn. It was the crest when you were born. Your father's father wore it, and your father wore it too. Hal and Toe, jolly rumble, we were up long before the day to welcome in the summertime. Welcome in the mail, for summer is a-coming in, and winter's gone away. Robin Hood and Little John have both gone to the fair, oh, and we shall to the merry greenwood to hunt the bark and hare, oh, Hal and Toe, jolly rumble, we were up long before the day, oh, to welcome in the summertime, welcome in the May, oh, for summer is a-coming in, and winter's gone away. What happened to the Spaniard? The mates are brave, the boast, oh, that they shall eat the feather good.